In today's video, Noah and I set our sights on processing power, because progress without power is no progress at all. Watch as we evolve from cogs to coils, from water wheels to power plants. You wanted 300 days, and now the wait is finally over. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our industrial paradise in the Modpack. Create above and beyond. Hey you! Do you want to play mod packs? Do you want to play them with friends? Single player gets pretty lonely, huh? Then head on over to Bisect Hosting, a great place with great prices for all your server hosting needs. They support so many mod packs that I have yet to find one that they don't. Use code Doublesal at checkout for 25% off your first order. Bisect Hosting, a great site for great servers, because hanging out with pigs, it gets pretty old. Ah yes, the journey to 300 days. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think we were gonna get this far, especially without the use of Tinker's construct tools. Now this is a very useful mod that allows you to make custom tools and custom weapons, which is exactly what we're gonna do right now. Now the beauty of this mod is that you can customize your tool for absolutely anything. You can make your tool extremely durable, you can even make it extremely fast. The choice is yours depending on the material that you use. In this case, we were gonna use Manulin. A great choice if you're looking for durability. In order to make it, you needed two types of metals, the first being cobalt and the second being ancient debris. It was time to revisit the nether, but before we could do that, we needed a sheep farm. When it comes to looking for ancient debris, I prefer to use the bed method. Going into the nether, digging straight down, and then using a bed to blow a bunch of blocks up. I think it's pretty effective. But for that, we were gonna need a ton of wool, so I bred the sheep until there was enough wool to make dozens of beds. Now beds don't stack and my shulker box was out of room. So I decided to use a toolbox. And though it had 8 slots, you could actually stack beds in it. Now the nether has never been kind to me. So to keep ourselves safe, we fortified our nether spawn. It wasn't much, but we did put up some walls. We even started a little mine shaft right behind them. I descended into the mines, and mind you, we had yet to mine anything from them. So believe me when I say that finding this cobalt immediately is not suspiciously convenient. It was time to blow things up. And when you do this, one thing to remember is that taking damage is inevitable. So be sure to watch your health because you may accidentally blow yourself up. But if you do survive, then it's payday. In short, the risk is worth the reward. By the end of my mining session, I had plenty of ancient debris. Unfortunately, we weren't done with the nether just yet. Why? Because we needed a blaze spawner. Usually we kill blazes for blaze rods, but in this case we needed the blazes dead because we wanted their blood. Now that may have sounded morbid, but blaze blood is actually just lava. In fact, it's actually hotter than lava, which is exactly why we needed it. Blocks like ancient debris, those aren't gonna melt with regular lava. If we wanted to melt those metals and get the job done, then only blaze blood was hot enough. Now I know you guys remember when I said the nether's never been kind to me. I only stepped 1 foot out the door, and that was enough to be ambushed by a mob of piglins. I didn't even know they could open the door! Thankfully, everything worked itself out. Literally all of them just ran into the portal. After I was done composing myself, I set off. I carefully bridged over the lava oceans, hoping that I wouldn't fall down. Thank God, I found a blaze spawner that wasn't that far away. I mean, we were looking for a fortress, but hey, this works too. Now the goal was to take the spawning room and convert it into a smeltery. The logic behind this was that they'd spawn, they'd die, and then the smelter would collect the blood. I went back to the overworld, got some materials for the smeltery build, and then after that, while trying not to get myself killed, I carefully broke each block, replacing it with seared brick for the smeltery. Once it was done, it didn't take long for those blazes to start spawning and generating that sweet, sweet blaze blood. Many blazes later, we finally had buckets worth of the stuff. Back at the factory, we began our metal melting process. First with the cobalt, and then with the ancient debris. With the molten metals mixed together, we now had Manulin. I poured the molten Manulin into gold casts. And once the molten metals had cooled and solidified, I was able to take the parts out, put them on a tinker's anvil, and make the ultimate pickaxe. Now even though we had our pickaxe, we were only halfway done. You see, pickaxe was good, but it could always be better. Now if you don't know what I mean, I'm talking about upgrades. Those that would give our durability a nice little boost. We could do this with items like the obsidian pane. It's basically a plate of obsidian, and when you pour molten iron over it, it becomes even stronger. When you put that on your tool, you get more durability points. I also added a diamond and an emerald, not just because they look fancy, but because they added so much more durability. This pickaxe was never gonna break. In the end, I ended up making 2 more tools. A hammer, which could mine stone in a 3x3 radius, and an excavator, which was a shovel that could mine dirt in a 3x3 radius. These tools were gonna do just fine. The next task at hand was to automate our next assembly line. We last left off by making induction coils. One of the steps for doing that was by taking a chromatic compound, throwing it over a beacon, and converting it into refined radiance. At the time, we were just tossing them in manually, so we needed a way to automate this. The only problem was that this process wasn't automatic. The first thing I did was build the beacon. I even left a little hole above it so that the beam could pass straight through. The chromatic compounds were making their way towards the beacon. Once they went over the beam, they were converted, but there was only one problem. See, when a chromatic compound is converted, it begins to float. All we had to do was put a trap door. That way when they converted, they wouldn't float away. Then with the help of a mechanical fan, they would just be blown on to the next assembly line. The refined radiance was pressed into these beautiful thin sheets. The sheets would then go into a mechanical crafter where they were converted into the induction coils. After that, the items would go up the assembly line, down a series of hoppers, and straight into the deployers. Lastly, they would convert the precision mechanisms into inductive mechanisms. Finally, the catharsis was coming to a close. This was exciting because with the inductive mechanisms now at our disposal, we could craft some complex machinery. The next task was to create Invar machinery. To do that, we were gonna need a lot of Invar ingots. Now you can either make it or you can buy it, but it's super expensive and we're cheapskates, so we're gonna make it instead. Now the main ingredient was nickel. And let me tell you, buying nickel was way cheaper than buying Invar. After that, we went back to the old factory to combine the nickel with another metal, that metal being iron. The next step was to make something called a nickel compound, and to do that you needed to combine the ingot with iron dust. Hang in there, because the next step is where things get a little tedious. The nickel compound has to be put in a blast furnace, and only a blast furnace. This makes an unprocessed Invar ingots, and the annoying thing is that these items do not stack. It won't take long before your inventory is full, so you gotta find a way to process them fast. And this is where the annoying part comes in, because to actually process it, it has to be smashed 16 times. So, we had the bright idea of making more mechanical presses. The next step was to craft Invar casing. All we had to do was take the Invar ingot and combine it with a stone block. Now it doesn't look like much, but the Invar casing would act as the foundation for every machine from here on out. The next step was to surround the casing with inductive mechanisms. And with that, we finally had an Invar machine. Now one thing I did notice while going through this process was that our original workshop, it was a little small. We were in dire need of an upgrade, so I went into the creative world and designed something new. Once I was done, I imported the design into the survival world, and I had it built with our beautiful trusty schematic cannon. The only problem was that this factory expansion was a little too big. You can actually place the blueprint down and see the building as a hologram, just to see how it would look in your world, and when I placed the hologram down, it was actually bleeding into our woodshop. So, I had to break some of our woodshop down so that this new expansion could fit. After that, I let the schematic cannon do its thing, and after a short while, we had a beautiful new addition to our factory. And the best part was that the inside was already fitted with all the machines that we needed. And underneath the floor was the furnace generator that would power it all. We had mixers, millstones, presses, whatever it was we needed, that wing of the factory, it had it. To inaugurate the newest addition to the factory, Noah decided to make himself some Invar ingots. For Noah, making Invar was a very lengthy process because I didn't help him. He had to figure it out all by himself. But after a very long time and a whole lot of Google searches, Noah was able to make himself some well-deserved Invar ingots. Now we talked about how the Invar ingots can make us machines, and up until now, everything's been powered with either water wheels, windmills, or furnace generators. But for the Invar machines, we were going to use a power called redstone flux. Generating redstone flux wasn't going to be a problem. In fact, we already had a way of doing it. We did this with a Stirling dynamo, a block that allows you to burn coal in exchange for energy. But if you want a ton of energy, then you have to figure out a way to store it. This is where the flux cell comes in. In short, it's a big battery. You get to store energy for as long as you want, and whenever you need it, you simply take it out, power your machines. But if we really wanted to use this block, then there were a couple of items that we had to craft first. With the help of our handy Invar machines, we were able to craft an induction smelter. It's basically a fancy furnace that can combine metals. And the first step to making the flux cell was by making a new metal called constantan. All you gotta do is take copper and nickel, put them in the induction smelter, and you're all set. We then used the metals to make a constantan gear. a necessary item for the flux cell frame, the frame being the basis for the flux cell. I then made a few flux cells and added the Stirling dynamos on top. Once I put the coal in, power was being generated and transferred into the cells. I wanted to tinker with the design, so I added some drawers, furnaces, even hoppers, hoping to come up with something that could generate infinite power. But in the end, I didn't like the way it looked. It was too bulky, and I wanted something a little smaller. I made some Invar flux ducts, which were basically cables that could transfer the power into the machines. Machines like the pyrolyzer. It's basically a super furnace. You put stuff in, and it charged it even more. After that, we did a little reorganizing. All of our drawers were now in the wood shop. And the best part was that the wood shop was conveniently located next to the machine shop. Now that was a real time saver. After that, it was time to begin the next chapter titled Into the Box. And to get started, there were 4 things that we needed to accomplish, with the first task being sand generation. We needed a lot of sand. We also needed more space in our factory, so it was time to build a second wing. Unfortunately, the side of our new wing was occupied by all of these gross trees. Our only choice was to remove them, because progress never stops. With the help of a controlled fire and our trusty excavator, we were able to clear out the trees and build our brand new wing. When it came to the looks of the interior and exterior, this new wing was exactly identical to the other one. With a brand new addition to the factory, we could finally produce sand. We were gonna do this with crushing wheels. At this point, crushing wheels were a little outdated. I mean, we could have used a machine called a pulverizer, but Invar? It's really expensive. First, I laid out the conveyor belt, and then after that, I got the crushing wheels up and running. We used Noah's trusty cobblestone generating design. And even though we're all about progress and advancing towards the future, sometimes it's okay to look back and reference the old ways. The cobblestone was being generated, going down the assembly line and being crushed by the crushing wheels. On the other side, we would get sand, clay, sometimes even flint. We only needed the sand, so we set some funnels up and filtered the other items out. After that, the next step was to wash the sand. By washing it, you produce a ball of sand. Now normally we'd use a mechanical fan, but we were excelling to new technologies, introducing the fluid encapsulator. In short, it's a fancy washing machine. And this is where the power of redstone flux comes into play, because we had energy to power it. Look at all that juice! Although we did have to pump the water from underneath the factory into the fluid encapsulator, because water, well, you can't make it out of thin air. Finally, we automated another system. Sand goes in, balls of sand come out. But we weren't done yet, because the balls of sand had to be refined even further. We had to convert the balls into sand chunks. We could actually do this by taking them, putting them over an item drain, and having the rest of the sand filter through. This process would turn the ball of sand into sand chunks, and the excess sand, it would be filtered into a tank where we'd save it for later. We were almost done with the whole sand process, but before we could go any further, we were gonna need lava, specifically 1 bucket of lava. What should have been a simple task was blown extremely out of proportion. We were this far into the create mod, and we had yet to make ourselves an infinite lava source. The design you're about to see was inspired by another YouTuber. To get infinite lava, we were gonna start with 2 nether portals and a conveyor belt in between them. I set up some pipes and even a couple of spaces for our large lava tanks. After that, I went to the nether to set up the machine on the other side. I used a new block called a hose pulley. With the crank attached to the side, I could lower the hose down into the lava and pump it straight from the source. But how are we going to power these pumps? Well, once again, we were going to reference the old ways, wind power. Instead of building an entire windmill, I made a contraption out of wool. It would still capture the wind, turn the cogs, and pump the lava. Back in the overworld, I ended up destroying the other portal because we just didn't need it. Now some of you may be wondering how exactly this machine's gonna work. It's pretty simple. A bucket goes in, and lava comes out. But if you really want a detailed explanation, then here it is. Empty buckets go on the assembly line. They travel around the conveyor belt until they go into the nether portal and out the other side. In the nether, they rotate around until they reach a spout, which fills the bucket with lava. Once the bucket's filled, it goes back to the overworld. It goes down the assembly line until it reaches an item drain. After that, the bucket is emptied. The lava's pumped through the pipes, and it goes into the lava tank. The empty bucket goes back into the portal, and the cycle begins all over again. Now you may be asking yourself, how are they powering this all? That's an excellent question. Once again, we reference the old ways because good old wind power never fails. So why did we put ourselves through all of that trouble? Well, I promise it's worth it. Now that we had our lava, we could finally begin the next step of this chapter. It was time to make basalt. With our 1 block of lava, blue ice, and some soul soil, we were able to produce the block, and we used Noah's cobblestone generating design to break it. The next step was where things got extremely complicated. More complicated than I want to admit. It was time to use an item called the alchemical laser. So why did we need basalt? We needed to convert the blocks into something called basalt shards. And the only way to make that conversion was with the alchemical laser. Now my plan was a simple one. We were going to take the basalt and put it in a minecart. Along with the basalt, we were also going to throw in a magnet. A necessary item if we were going to make this conversion. The minecart would sway from side to side while I turned the crank around with the hopes that eventually the laser would zap the minecart. With a machine like this, timing was key. And in the end, I ended up designing one of the most complicated contraptions we had ever built on this server. It took up way too much space and it was ugly and sometimes it didn't even work. I wanted to take the machine and refine it even further, and the only way for me to do this was to first go to the nether and make infernal mechanisms. The next step was to collect vines from the nether, the blue ones and the red ones, and to be honest, I don't know their names, but that's what we needed. The plan was to farm them, and with the help of my trusty sledgehammer, I was able to clear a space where I could plant them and watch them grow. I planted them in neat little rows, and then after that I built the assembly line for the infernal mechanisms. All you needed was liquid soul and 3 spouts of lava. But how does one make liquid soul? That's where the vines come in. You put both of them in the basin, both red and blue, and then they get mixed together. The byproduct is liquid soul, which is then pumped into a storage tank until we need it for later. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was that when it comes to infernal mechanisms, we're not building them from the ground up. We're actually making a conversion using precision mechanisms. To make the conversion, it's like I said before, 1 squirt of liquid soul and 3 of lava. This was a really fun side quest, but the question remains, why did we actually need these? We needed an item called zinc machines, a necessary block to condense our assembly line. To make the machine, you start off with a simple zinc casing, and once you have that item, surround it with infernal mechanisms to make the zinc machine. It's important to know that this block can be converted into a number of helpful items, some of which were going to help us for this next assembly line. The basalt machine was taking way too much space, and like I said before, I wanted to condense our machine to something a little smaller, so that's where the igneous extruder comes in. We were able to cut that size down to 1 block. It's basically a stone generator, and its block output is way higher than the original machine, so this was a win-win. We wanted to condense our alchemical laser machine, and that we did, thanks to the help of YouTuber Rage Plays Games. Bear with me when I go ahead and explain how it works. It all starts at the igneous extruder, our basalt generating machine. The blocks are generated, and then, via item pipe, they're transferred to a block called a minecart loader. And the minecart loader does exactly that. Once there were 4 stacks of basalt in there, a signal would be sent. While traveling, it would be zapped by the alchemical laser, converting all the basalt into basalts. The minecart was now over a block called the minecart unloader, and then from the unloader into another block called a pulverizer. The pulverizer would then take the basalt shards and crush them into basalt powder. The powder was then transferred to a basin, where it would be crushed even further by a mechanical press. After being pressed together, you had earth charges, which were then transferred via item pipes into storage drawers. On the other side of the skill tree, we had to convert snowballs into blizz cubes, and the process was identical to that of the earth charges. We had an alchemical laser, there were pulverizers, there was mechanical presses. In the end, the snowballs were converted into blizz cubes. Then with the help of a pulverizer, the blizz cubes were then turned into blizz dust, which in turn was converted into ice charges. Earth charges, ice charges, we had them both, but we weren't going to need them until later because we had more things to make, like a new building. I had the schematic cannon working on a secret project while we were working inside the factory, and this project was massive. Our largest addition to this world yet, we were building a power plant. While that was being built, I decided to connect all of our machines onto one assembly line. We were going to take all of our products, the earth charges, the ice charges, the sand chunks, they were all going to go on one assembly line to be combined into our next mechanism. Once again, item pipes proved to be extremely useful. We were able to transfer the items into the induction smelter, which would then combine them both into something new. With the sand chunks and earth charges combined, you get purified sand. The purified sand is then moved into a basin. It's combined with fine sand and coke chunks. Where did the coke chunks come from? Well, we had another machine on the second floor. To make coke chunks, you have to put charcoal into a pyrolyzer. The pyrolyzer burns the charcoal even more, making coke. This coke is basically charcoal 2.0. It's better than charcoal in every way. To To make the coke chunks, the coke is then squirted with water twice. Then it's cut into pieces by the saws. Once the chunks are done, they move into the item pipe and down into the basin where they are mixed with the purified sand and the fine sand. The result is a silicon compound. The silicon compound is then moved from the basin into an induction smelter. There it's going to be combined with ice charges from Noah's snowball machine. The ice charges are transferred from the snowball machine to the induction smelter via item pipe. Once they enter the induction smelter, the items are combined to make silicon. The item is then crushed under an inscriber silicon press. This makes printed silicon. Kinda looks like a microchip. The new item once again goes into the item pipes, up into a chest, and down a sequence of hoppers where it's then put into the deployers, which will then convert our inductive mechanisms into calculating mechanisms. That process took way longer than it should have because by the time we had wrapped things up, our power plant was finally complete. Crowned with glass ceilings and 4 diorite smokestacks, this power plant would act as the beating heart of our industrial paradise. It was taller, it was wider than anything we had built. Comprised of 3 levels, each floor would serve its own special purpose. It was pretty cool. And the first thing we needed to do to start generating power was build, you guessed it, a tree farm. This was going to be your stereotypical coal power plant. And how do you get charcoal? Well, you gotta burn a ton of logs. Similar to the wood farm design from the last episode, the only thing we did here was just make it even bigger. More saplings, more saws, more deployers, more wood. Now the tree farm was on the top level. 1 floor below was going to be the furnace room. There, with the help of multiple furnaces, we were going to burn that wood. The wood was going to be carried via item pipes. The pipes would transfer it from furnace to furnace, all of which would burn them up. The logs would go down the chutes, into the fire, and at the bottom they would come out as charcoal. They dropped through another series of chutes until they finally ended up in a Stirling dynamo. And that's where our power was being generated. The coal was being burned by the Stirling dynamo to generate redstone flux, the lifeblood of all of our machines from here on out. And all of that power was being stored in our flux cells, those giant beautiful batteries that we made a few minutes ago. That's what we were going to use them for. Once we had completed the first side of the power plant, I went back to review every single floor, and I gotta say that the designs, well, let's just say they demonstrate how far we've come. This power plant and all of its machines were gonna be a real gem. The only problem was that I forgot to build a door. I mean, we had the 2 gaping entrances on both sides, but there was no way to get to them unless you had a grappling hook, something I didn't have. Jokes aside, I didn't forget to build the door. The design was intentional because the only way to get into this building was going to be via train. That's right, we were finally going to build trains. But before you build trains, you have to make train tracks. So that's what I did. I built the platform, laid down the tracks, made sure that everything looped around perfectly for the train, and then it was time to design our locomotive. To tell you the truth, I think I'm better at designing buildings than actual vehicles. This was kinda tricky, but I thought it came out okay at the end. I mean, it looked like a train, kinda. Now before I unveiled the design of the train, one thing I had to take into consideration was we needed train tracks on the outside. I mean, where was the train line gonna start? Where was it gonna end? And at the time I thought that I was gonna start the line at our original building. After 3 videos, it was finally time for Old Faithful to come down. With my axe in hand, I began to tear down the walls, then the ceiling, and then I realized that was just taking way too long, so I opted to set it on fire. It was nice while it lasted. Well, there she is, in all of her glory, our beautiful train. For something that's held together with glue, I think it looks pretty good. But above all else, does she work? Yes. Yes, she does. Thanks to the help of our cart assembler, the minecart was able to move multiple blocks, and in this case, that was our train. It wasn't an elytra, but it beats walking. It could also take us across oceans. I mean, we did have the train design, which means we could make more train stops, more train tracks. Now our reach was limitless. We had finally reached day 300. To christen the 300th day of our survival challenge, it was time to finally complete the 4th chapter. It was time to make an ME controller, the one block that would catapult us into the digital age. Everything that we've worked on, everything that we had accomplished, all of it was leading up to this moment. One that the Modpack had dubbed the finale. And after taking a peek at the skill tree for the next chapter, I could tell that this was going to be a real grand ending. We've come a long way since day one. From a simple hut to our palaces of progress, our industrial paradise, with the help of all of its machines, was ready to set its sights on some cosmic aspirations. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want a part 4, 400 days, leave a like, be sure to subscribe. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.